Children are our future, and education is a pathway out of poverty towards prosperity and better health. The decision to open schools or not amid the pandemic is a difficult one, but we must find the right balance to avoid trading one adversity for another. The longer that children are out of school, the greater the risk that they may not return to school.
That's Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, the World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa, in a press conference on August 20th, 2020, encouraging nations to safely reopen schools as a new school year begins in many parts of the continent. We'll have more of her statement coming up in this episode on education amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Across Africa, more than 140 million children are out of schools amid coronavirus-related closures. For several months now, governments around the world have struggled with the decision to reopen or keep closed the schools during the coronavirus pandemic. In South Africa, the government shuttered schools in March, reopening them in June, only to have them closed again when the nation's coronavirus numbers started to spike. The Kenyan government decided early on to close the primary and secondary schools for the remainder of 2020. As leaders contemplate these difficult decisions, the key question remains, what is best for students at the moment? This is Our Voices. I am Auriane Itangishaka. What challenges do we face by African students being out of school during the COVID-19 pandemic? Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, the World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa, says, "We must not be blindsided by our efforts to contain COVID-19 and end up with a lost generation. Just as countries are opening for business safely, we can reopen schools."
School closures are potentially exacerbating risks of teenage pregnancies, of violence against children, of substance abuse, of anxiety, loneliness, and isolation. At least 18 million children in sub-Saharan Africa benefit from school meals. And in households that are struggling to make ends meet, children being out of school contributes to increased food insecurity. Modeling by the World Bank indicates that school closures in sub-Saharan Africa could lead to losses in lifetime earnings of $4,500 per child. This is something clearly that we cannot afford.
Now let's begin our conversation by looking at the challenges of getting an education in places where the end of COVID-19 seems to be a hard thing to hope for. In South Africa, after several stops and starts, the nation's school system is trying to reopen the classrooms again. VOA's Anita Powell reports from Johannesburg.
After 5 months of uncertainty and home learning, South Africa is going back to school. The nation closed its 23,000 government schools in March as part of a 9-week lockdown to try to stop the viral spread. They reopened in June, briefly, and then closed again when infections spiked. Most recently, the school system took a 4-week break, with plans to resume nationwide in early September.
Cabinet has decided today that all public schools should take a break for the next 4 weeks. Now, this has also been the experience in a number of other countries, where schools have opened and have also had to close due to the circumstances that each country has had to confront.
A recent survey by the World Health Organization found that schools are fully open in only 6 of 39 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. About a dozen countries, including South Africa, plan to resume in-person learning in September. But education experts say this is no ordinary school year.
There's not going to be a continuous schooling until the pandemic is almost over, because when individuals are infected, the school closes. There's protocols are put in place to bring back the safety of the schools. So we're going to consistently experience this.
And in that way, he says, this pandemic could present a unique opportunity.
What we need to focus is on to say, how is the learning that they're going to receive right now relevant to them, in their lives right now, and in the future? And that requires almost a review of what we teach in schools and make it relevant to them right now.
The school closures have created other unforeseen opportunities. Recent education graduate Zafira Ahmad built a private teaching business with 7 students between the ages of 3 and 8. Some will return to full-time school, others won't. She says she sympathizes with the decisions teachers are making right now.
Yeah, I am concerned about contracting the virus, but at the same time, I'm also concerned about the education of children and them lagging behind being out of school. And for me, that concern outweighs the concern of actually getting the virus.
Ahmad says she would much prefer to teach at an actual school and for things to be normal again. But for now, she says she's focused on keeping her students learning. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
As we've mentioned, the Kenyan government made the decision to close its primary and secondary schools for the rest of the year to curb the spread of COVID-19. This East African nation is now facing another outbreak: teenage pregnancies. During the 3 months of lockdown, more than 152,000 Kenyan teenage girls became pregnant, a 40% increase in the monthly average. Mohammed Yusuf has more on this story.
Kenyan children have extra time off since schools closed in March due to the coronavirus pandemic. That is making them more vulnerable to sexual predators. This mother of 5 says a 20-year-old man targeted her teenage daughter at home and got her pregnant.
I started interrogating my daughter. She started to explain how the man will come in the house while I am away, give her 10 to 20 shillings, and take her to another dark building near our place.
Some of the abused children end up in a safe house like this in central Nairobi. The center hosts 26 girls. 17 of them came here between March and July. Florence, who runs the house, says there are many more girls who need a safe home.
We can only take the number that we can really manage. It's so sad that we sometimes deny cases at the gate. So we just say that we can't take them in because we are full.
Kenya's Ministry of Health says it has received at least 5,000 sexual violence cases across the country. 65% of them involve girls below the age of 18, many of whom live in poverty. Officials say in many cases the perpetrators are close to the victims do not believe the abuse is a crime.
They don't know that this is a punishable thing or is a punishable crime, but then now they accept just because their parents cannot afford to provide certain items.
Andiso says she worries that her children are more vulnerable to abuse if schools remain closed. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Nairobi.
It's time to take a break, but when we return, we'll hear from experts as well as community activists on the lessons learned from previous pandemics such as Ebola and tips on how to continue education safely during a pandemic. Stay with us.
Being part of Our Voices is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them
and bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.
Welcome back, you with Our Voices. Thanks for being with us. Education during a pandemic is difficult. What are lessons that have been learned from previous pandemics such as Ebola, and what are some potential solutions during COVID-19? Let's begin in Liberia. In an article written by the Minister of Education, George Warner, in the early weeks of COVID-19 pandemic, he wrote, "To close schools during a crisis like this is to ask our youngest generation to make a tremendous sacrifice on behalf of its elders." I reached out to Richlue Burphy, a community engagement and outreach specialist who worked in 2015 to fight Ebola in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. In an article, he writes about the importance of bringing awareness of the nature of the disease during a pandemic as one of the keys to safely continue the education process, and he tells us more. Take a look.
The closure of schools during the Ebola was something that affected some of us so much as far as our community programming were concerned. And we didn't think knowing that Ebola was a new phenomenon to the country, we thought that it was important that the education be sustained in terms of reaching out to people on what Ebola was, how to prevent it, how it is, how it gets into people's system and what have you. However, the schools were closed, and during that period, it was something that we thought that the rights of the Liberian children to learn was being deprived, because while the schools were closed, there were not a lot of alternatives that were put in place as far as ensuring that students could continue learning while they were at home. And so when we saw that the situation started going down, the nation as a whole started to get better, I think it was a perfect opportunity for the government to have jump-started the reopening process of the schools.
Now, what are some measures, safety measures, that you notice both the government and civil society organizations put in place in order to protect both the students and the teachers as they went back into school during the Ebola pandemic?
I think one of the key ones was the issue of the washing of hands. Not just washing of hands, but with detergents, okay, the chlorine and all those things, that the disinfectants that were in the water. We had to make sure that the school system sustained that. It was something that the government announced. We, at the community level, we had to make sure that schools erected the washing hand stations, and students were encouraged to wash their hands frequently as much as possible. So as part of our community programming work, we were able to work with some of the schools in the rural areas to, especially those that could not afford, we had to get them to wash the buckets, we have to get them the disinfectants, and we had to help them erect the washing hand stations on the various campuses. Not just that, we had to do sessions with some of the students, the student body, to show them how to properly wash their hands.
Is distant learning, like radio schools or online courses for both primary, secondary, and university school as a whole, both in Liberia and other parts of the continent, a myth, or is it actually possible?
When it comes to the issue of online learning or distant learning, I think it is possible in Liberia if we are willing, if we have the political will, if we have the desire for it, and we make the necessary efforts. Because online learning, certain requirements have to be in place, certain setups have to be done, because it requires a technology, it requires some other things that if the system does not put in place, online learning will not become a reality. I saw that some of the universities attempted it here during the corona. I don't know how far they went with it, but I know that these are online learning is not something that is really ongoing here. But I believe it's possible, because there are a lot of us in Liberia that are learning online. There are a lot of us in Liberia that are associated with universities out of the country because of several reasons. Either we cannot afford to travel to those countries now, or visa issues and all that of stuff, scholarships and what have you. So we are managing to learn online. If you go to edX, Coursera, all those websites are places that some of us go to learn online. So online learning is possible here.
Let's look at a method of distant learning being used in Ghana. It's similar to many places on the continent. Schools on the radio. Through a partnership with USAID, the country is providing radio learning to millions of students. Stacy Knott explains from Accra.
In this Accra community, Dora Oppey rounds up neighbourhood children to join her for a radio reading program. She says since the program began 2 months ago, her young son's reading has improved. She gathers other children whose parents are working and encourages them to keep learning too.
I look at this long time from March, and we don't know the actual time they will ask them to come to school. So that's why I'm urging them to learn, so that by the time school will open, at least they will know something and read at least.
The hour-long programs are broadcast 6 days a week and rely on learning through play. USAID already had reading programs in Ghana when it joined the government and other partners to offer this radio reading program.
This really is a democratic approach. It gets out to the whole population, because the whole population actually, like 93%, goes to primary school. And this really builds that, presents a way of providing services to a large part of your population.
Ghana's Education Minister says the program is aimed at kindergarten and primary school children and will continue to be used post-pandemic.
We can have parents using the programs to assist their children at home as well. So the data, the recordings, the resources we are digitizing and putting out, is going to be of tremendous importance to learning in this country.
Technology and learning will require much needed training for teachers, education expert Jonathan Fletcher says.
Hopefully, this situation will help people to learn in different ways, and that will be an additional skill, or people develop expertise in the use of different strategies in teaching.
Fletcher notes that online learning doesn't make up for learning in the classroom, adding that not everyone has access to radios and other devices needed for remote learning. The government says it is working on a safe reopening of schools as soon as possible. Stacey Knott for VOA News, Accra.
While some may embrace the new normal of online learning, not all families are able to afford to pay for data or for the electricity necessary to keep the technologies running. Hilma Athumani reports from Kampala.
14-year-old Ugandan Musa Ssewanyana has mastered the art of bricklaying. He should be in high school, laying the foundation of his education. But since Uganda closed schools in March to contain the spread of the novel coronavirus, Ssewanyana has few options.
During the school break, I'm still reading my books. If we get money, we switch the TV on and follow the teachings. But I also do odd jobs, so I don't spend the whole day at home.
Unlike families who are financially able to study online, Ssewanyanas cannot always afford the power needed to watch lessons on state TV or the $3 per day subscription. His mother, Naiga Rashida, says the past 5 months have been difficult with her 3 children at home.
I don't have electricity. I had even bought them a new television set, knowing they would use it to study. But there are times when even the solar battery doesn't charge and the television goes off.
Uganda vowed to buy televisions and radios for poor communities with school children, but has yet to act. A $150 million July World Bank grant is expected to soon help provide learning materials for students nationwide. But some Ugandan education authorities say the damage is already done, including from school properties that were sold off or sitting vacant.
The chairs, the walls, some of them were eaten by ants. So by the time we reopen schools, we may need now to replenish, to buy another set of furniture. And that again goes with it. But that said, the loss of jobs for our teachers and losing property, but even losing our learners. We are worried the sensible percentage may not come back to school.
Education charity groups like Uwezo, which means capability in Kiswahili, says COVID-19 has caused both a health and education crisis. When schools eventually reopen, says Uwezo Executive Director Mary Goreti Nakavugo, children will have to make up for lost time.
The starting point would be to try and give a simple assessment to understand the level at which each of these kids is. Otherwise, if you take them as a whole, many of them are going to be left behind. And the ones who are going to be left behind are mainly the ones in the low-income families.
Meanwhile, Uganda's Ministry of Education is planning a campaign aimed at parents to encourage homeschooling. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala.
As physical or virtual learning begins slowly in many parts of the world, In the United States, many students are also facing learning challenges. My colleague Madina Maishanu recently spoke to some university students about these hurdles.
We started off January, we were all normal in our classrooms in person, but once the end of March hit, we all went online. It's been difficult as a journalism major because for us, journalism, as we say, is a contact sport. We have to go outside, we have to speak with people. So that's been a little difficult getting in contact with people. However, we have been, just like any other journalist in the working profession, persistent. So Zoom calls, Skype, phone, and we've had a pretty good success rate in that regard. However, it's nothing compared to going in person to your sources.
So personally, as a student that has experienced it all studying during the pandemic, what do you personally think is the best option or would be a solution to enable better learning during this hard time for everyone?
So I think that professors are doing the absolute best that they can with learning online. And I personally like the learning experience online. I feel like it's less commute time. People can study from wherever they are in the world. But one thing I think that can improve is the cost. So as we are not in the buildings, I would expect as a student now learning online for my tuition to lower because we are not using the building. The building fees include Wi-Fi, electricity, water, security, janitorial. All of these services we are not using. So I believe that there should be some improvement in that area. But overall, the learning experience for me has been overall pretty well considering the circumstances.
If you were given the choice, what would you pick?
I think it's extremely important that we stay home during these times. No degree, no amount of money or education costs a life. I think that we need to stay home and protect ourselves and others first, especially because students are in the not at risk category, but maybe some teachers are. So we need to be protecting our teachers as well. Anyone could get this disease and anyone can die no matter the age. So I think it's most important that we stay home. And then once we have a working vaccine and enough people take it, maybe we can consider coming back. But for now, I'm happy with how they have dealt with it in terms of keeping it online.
We have to take a quick break. But when we return, during this coronavirus pandemic, a Somali woman in the diaspora is rewarded for her outstanding work on the state level, while another young lady turns from student to teacher when school closes in her community. That's coming up in our Women to Watch segment. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're with Our Voices. Now we share with you two women we are keeping an eye on in our Women to Watch segment. A Somali American woman has been named Minnesota's Teacher of the Year of 2020. Qorsho Hassan is the first Somali American woman to receive this honor. VOA Maximud Maskade has more of this report narrated by Karen Gunzberg.
30-year-old Qorsho Hassan was surprised and thrilled when she was named Minnesota's Teacher of the Year in early August. It was a first for the state's Somali Americans.
I felt a lot of different emotions, happiness. I felt relieved. I also felt a lot of excitement, not just for myself, but for my family, my students, my school community, and the Somali community as well.
Hassan was chosen from among more than 130 nominees. She is credited with forging strong connections with her fifth-grade students at the Gideon Pond Elementary School in the Minneapolis suburb of Burnsville.
You have to make sure that the child is social and emotionally ready to learn, and if they aren't, that makes it challenging for them to understand the content and connect with their teacher.
Gideon Pond has roughly 500 students, and more than half come from low-income households. 2/3 are students of color. Hassan says she is focused on giving all youngsters a quality education.
Students of color, in particular Black students, face shortages when it comes to resources. and quality education. So I demand, whether I'm at a charter school or a public school, that all students receive quality education and that I give them resources that they need to be successful in the classroom and outside of the classroom as well.
Qorsho Hassan grew up in the Midwestern state of Ohio, where she taught school for 3 years. She also spent a year teaching in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, through the U.S. State Department's Fulbright Fellowship Program. Hassan lost her job at Gideon Park because of budget cuts, but she will be teaching 4th graders this fall at another Burnsville school, Echo Park Elementary.
I love creating an environment where my students feel comfortable, where they feel safe, where they can feel like they can talk to me about their problems, and then feel like they're supported in every way.
Hassan will represent Minnesota in the National Teacher of the Year contest. The winner will be announced next year. Meanwhile, she plans to use her new recognition to push for hiring more teachers of color. For Mohamud Masade, in Burnsville, Minnesota, Carol Gunsberg, VOA News.
We are also watching Fajir Ahmad, a student-turned-teacher. VOA Arasad Arbashadi brings us a story of a 13-year-old Palestinian teenager using her time away from school to enlighten children in her neighborhood. Let's take a look.
In this wooden shack in the Gaza Strip, neighborhood children attend classes at a makeshift school. Their regular school closed in March due to the coronavirus pandemic.
I wanted to bring them here and teach them. This is my talent. I have one girl in the 1st grade, and if she is absent from school for too long, she will forget how to hold a pen and write. I want to make sure they don't forget what they've learned in school.
13-year-old Palestinian student turned teacher Faj Maid teaches English, Arabic, and math to a class that's grown from 4 students to 15.
I would like to become a teacher in the future. Our area is a marginalized one, so I want to open my own education center and help make the people in my community successful.
Maid is just one of the teachers helping bridge the gap for students in Gaza forced to learn under unusual circumstances because of the pandemic.
I keep up with my classes here as well on the Ministry of Education website, where they post videos, so I watch those too.
So far, only 20 people have tested positive for COVID-19 in a territory with 712 schools. The area has been under an Israeli-led blockade since 2007 when Hamas assumed control of Gaza. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
Now those are 2 awesome women to watch. We'll have to end it here for this week, and we thank you for your time with us. On behalf of VOA and my colleagues here at Our Voices, thank you and have a wonderful day.